Welcome back to Darkly Speaking. I'm your host, Alex Kern, and October is almost here. A season when the air feels heavier, the nights stretch longer, and the world seems just a little stranger. I've got plenty of eerie episodes lined up for spooky season, but October is also Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So before we dive into hauntings and mysteries, I want to pause and acknowledge that reality. Because behind the ghost stories and true crime cases are real families, real lives, and real violence that too often hides in plain sight. That's why tonight, I want to talk about the case of Susan Powell and her two little boys, Charlie and Braden. Their story has been told many times, yes, but it still demands to be heard. Susan vanished in 2009, and her sons, Charlie and Braden, lost their lives in a fiery explosion set by their own father, a man who had already been an abusive husband. I don't tell this story because I can offer brand new details or talk about information you've probably already heard before. I tell it because their lives and Susan's warnings left behind matter. And if retelling this tragedy reaches even one person who needs the reminder that control and abuse can turn deadly, then it's worth telling again. So, without further ado, let's begin. It's December 2009 in West Valley City, Utah. A heavy storm had rolled through earlier, leaving the streets glazed with ice and street lamps casting a yellow haze over the snow. Neighbors remembered the night as bitterly cold and unusually still. Inside the Powell home, the heat was on, lights glowed in the windows, and everything looked normal from the outside. Yet, late that night, Josh Powell bundled his two young sons into the family minivan and drove off into the darkness. Hours later, when the sun rose, nothing was normal anymore. Susan Powell was gone. Her purse, phone, and car remained in the house. Everyday items that spoke volumes because they were the things Susan would have never left behind. But this night didn't come out of nowhere. The path toward it had been unfolding for years. Back in the early 2000s, Susan Cox met Josh Powell through the Mormon community. She was outgoing, artistic, and deeply caring. He was intense, ambitious, and awkwardly charismatic in a way that drew her in. Friends often remarked that Susan had a radiant presence about her. She seemed to brighten any room she walked into. Josh, by contrast, seemed to hover at its edges. Susan's parents quickly grew uneasy. They worried that their daughter, always compassionate, had taken Josh on as kind of a project, someone she could nurture and maybe even fix. He didn't have many friends, and she believed she could make him happy, help him build confidence, perhaps even temper the rough edges of his personality. Members of Josh's own family were also wary. His sister Jennifer Graves would later say she never trusted him, not even from the start. She pointed to their father, Stephen Powell, as a source of much of Josh's darkness. Years earlier, Stephen's marriage had collapsed in a bitter divorce, with court filings accusing him of abuse and manipulation. That fracture left the Powell family steeped in conflict and dysfunction. The children were divided, some staying loyal to Stephen, others pulling away in fear. Still, against the backdrop of all of those concerns, Susan and Josh married in the Mormon temple. On paper, it was the beginning of a new life, a young couple with shared faith, dreams of children, and the image of stability. Wedding photos captured smiles, holding hands, a hopeful beginning. But those who knew them best saw something else. Beneath the surface, there were already cracks. In Josh's temper, in his controlling streak, in the subtle ways Susan's bright personality seemed to dim when he was in the room. Cracks that would widen over the years until they became impossible to ignore, and eventually catastrophic. After their wedding, Susan and Josh eventually relocated to Utah in the early 2000s. For a time, they lived with Josh's sister, Jennifer, and her husband, Kirk. At first, it might have seemed like the practical step for a young couple, but Jennifer later recalled that it didn't take long for troubling patterns to surface. Josh was controlling, deciding what Susan could do, limiting her activities, and asserting authority over even the smallest of choices, including what she ate. That control was mirrored in other parts of their life together. Josh struggled to hold a steady job, drifting between careers in real estate, web design, and other ventures. He had big ambitions but little consistency. The instability left the family under financial strain, and Susan often found herself carrying the burden of keeping the household steady while Josh chased the next idea. The ongoing money troubles combined with Josh's need for control created a very tense and oppressive atmosphere in the home. Moments that should have been joyful were tainted by this same pattern. When Susan went into labor with their first child, Charlie, Josh was at home, but insisted he was too busy with work to drive her to the hospital. So her parents stepped in, worried and protective, and got her there safely. When Josh eventually showed up, Susan was already in active labor. Instead of standing by her side, he sat in the corner of their room with his computer, completely detached from the reality unfolding in front of him. For Susan's family, it was a startling confirmation of how self-absorbed he had become. The birth of their second son, Braden, a few years later, might have offered the couple a chance to start fresh. For many families, a new child can bring a renewed sense of unity. But in their case, the opposite happened. Parenthood only deepened the divide. Susan tried to create stability and routine, carefully tucking the boys into bed each night, hoping to give them the structure she longed for. Josh would follow behind, completely undoing her efforts and calling the children back out, undermining her rules and teaching them not to listen to their mother. In those small daily moments, the imbalance of power in their marriage became undeniable. Jennifer believed this behavior echoed the influence of their father, Stephen Powell. Around this time, Josh began calling Stephen constantly, sometimes spending hours on the phone each week. Susan confided to Jennifer that life with Josh was becoming unbearable, and she suspected that Stephen was deliberately fueling the conflict. The effect was unmistakable. Each conversation with Stephen seemed to drive a deeper wedge between Susan and Josh, leaving her feeling more isolated with every passing year. As her marriage worsened, Susan began opening up to the people she trusted most. Close friends and coworkers later recalled how she quietly confided in them about Josh's behavior, how dismissive, controlling, and volatile he had become. Her words painted the picture of a woman carrying far more than her share of the weight at home. The strain wasn't only emotional, it was financial too. Susan often expressed frustration that she was the only one holding the family together while Josh spent recklessly or detached himself from other responsibilities. By July of 2008, Susan took a step that showed just how serious her concerns had become. She recorded a video inventory of the family's belongings and their home, explicitly stating on camera that it was for the record, quote, "just in case something happens to me," end quote. The footage would later be seen as chilling foreshadowing.
This is me, July 29th, 2008. It is 12:33 Mountain Time. Covering all my bases, making sure that if something happens to me or my family or all of us, that our assets are documented. Hope everything works out and we're all happy and live happily ever after as much as that's possible.
Investigators would also recover emails Susan had sent to her sister-in-law, Jennifer. In them, she was brutally honest about her fears about Josh and the direction their marriage was heading. Despite the cracks, Josh resisted divorce, not because the marriage could be saved, but because he knew a split would leave him with nothing. Susan had the stable income, and as the boy's mother, custody would almost certainly favor her. So without Susan, Josh would lose both financial security and control. By this point, Susan wasn't speaking in vague terms. In conversations with friends, she admitted she feared Josh might seriously hurt her or worse. Her writings, emails, and recordings would later become haunting evidence of a woman who knew she was in danger but felt trapped in her marriage. Susan also left behind a secret will stored in a safety deposit box with explicit instructions that it was not to be seen or shared with her husband. In that will, she documented fears and suspicions, writing the chilling line, quote, "If I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one," end quote. It was a clear indication of how seriously she believed she was at risk. The morning of December 7th, 2009 was dark, gray, and bitterly cold in Salt Lake City, Utah. It was a Monday, and the routine of a workday should have been unfolding. Yet, both Josh and Susan failed to show up for work, and their boys never showed up for daycare. Silence stretched where there should have been the noise of everyday life. So daycare staff, unsettled by the absence, tried calling Josh and Susan over and over. No answer. Growing uneasy, they contacted the emergency contact on file, which is Josh's sister, Jennifer. Jennifer and her husband, Kirk, drove to the Powell home hoping to find a simple explanation. Instead, they stepped into a completely empty house. No Susan, no children. Jennifer would later describe the instant wave of dread that washed over her, a gut-deep certainty that Josh had done something to her sister-in-law. It wasn't until late that afternoon that Josh appeared, pulling into the driveway with Charlie and Braden. But Susan wasn't with them. For Jennifer and Kirk, it confirmed the feeling they couldn't shake. Something terrible had happened. When pressed, Josh offered a story that sounded more like a cover than the truth. Josh claimed he had taken the boys camping in the middle of the night. But his story doesn't add up, and the hours leading up to Susan's disappearance tell a completely different story. The day before, on Sunday, December 6th, 2009 at 12 p.m., Susan took Charlie and Braden to church at their local LDS ward. It was an ordinary Sunday for the young mother. Later that afternoon at 2:29 p.m., she called a friend, her last recorded phone call ever. By around 5 o'clock, a neighbor came by the house. Susan mentioned she was tired and laid down for a nap as the neighbor left. That moment, casual, unremarkable, would be the last time anyone outside of her family saw her alive. Josh later said he took the boys sledding that evening, and at around 8:30 p.m., a neighbor noticed Josh pull the minivan into the garage. By 11:45 p.m., another neighbor heard a car alarm blaring from the inside of that same closed garage, while the house sat dark and silent. That silence carried over into the early hours of Monday morning. Sometime between 12 and 12:30 a.m. in the middle of the night, Josh said he loaded Charlie, age 4, and Braden, age 2, into the family van and drove them out into the West Desert, 2 hours away at Simpson Springs in sub-freezing temperatures. He claimed Susan stayed behind, home asleep, after cleaning a red stain from the carpet. By Josh's account, when they returned home later that day, Susan was simply gone. He insisted he had no idea what happened, but the story didn't hold. Who takes toddlers camping at midnight in a snowstorm? And why leave his wife behind? In the days that followed, Susan's family pleaded publicly for her safe return, while the Powell family completely closed ranks around Josh. Within 10 days, police named Josh a person of interest. He refused to cooperate, then abruptly packed up his home, moved Charlie and Braden out of Utah, and went to live with his father Stephen in Puyallup, Washington. And then came the most unsettling claim of all. Stephen Powell stepped forward, insisting that Susan hadn't been harmed, that she had simply run off with another man. The disturbing obsession behind that theory and what it would eventually reveal was darker than anyone could have imagined. After Josh uprooted his life in Utah, he and the boys moved in with his father, Stephen Powell, in Puyallup, Washington. For Susan's family, it was a complete nightmare. Stephen was already known for being domineering, eccentric, and disturbingly inappropriate. Even his own children, including Jennifer, had long tried to keep their distance. The warning signs had been there years earlier. In the early days of her marriage, Susan and Josh had stayed with Stephen for a short time. Susan later confided how uneasy it made her. Stephen spied on her while she was changing, and during one car ride, he even suggested she should be shared between him and Josh. Susan was obviously horrified and completely shaken by this. Later, Stephen twisted the truth, insisting it was Susan who had been aggressive, that she had secretly wanted him. Jennifer rejected that completely. She said what everyone already knew. Stephen was obsessed with Susan, and she wanted nothing to do with him. Friends and family whispered about his fixation, about the way he spoke about her, about the way his attention lingered for too long. Even when confronted, Stephen clung to his delusions. He told people Susan had run off with another man and chillingly admitted his only regret was that he hadn't taken things further with her. Now, Susan was missing, Josh was the prime person of interest, and instead of helping, Stephen spread lies that shifted the blame onto her. Father and son stood united, keeping control of Charlie and Braden, while Chuck and Judy Cox were left devastated, knowing their grandsons were now being raised in Stephen's home, under the influence of both men. As investigators in Utah pressed forward, the focus shifted back to West Valley City. When Susan was reported missing, detectives in West Valley City wasted no time. Their first stop was the Powell home, and what they found inside raised alarms right away. Near a couch in the living room, investigators discovered small traces of Susan's blood. 2 fans were running, both aimed directly at the couch as if someone had tried to dry it after a cleanup. It wasn't enough blood to prove violence, but paired with Susan's belongings, her purse, her phone, her car, all left behind, it told investigators she hadn't walked out on her own. Then there was Josh's story. He insisted he had taken the boys camping in the middle of the night. Under questioning, however, the details shifted and fell apart completely. Who bundles 2 toddlers into a van at midnight in a snowstorm and drives hours into the desert? Why leave Susan behind? His answers were vague, evasive, and detectives weren't buying it. As the weeks dragged on, Josh's behavior only deepened suspicion. He offered little in interviews, refused to help in searches, and pulled further away from the investigators. To police, one conclusion became clear by the day. Susan had been the victim of foul play, and everything pointed back to Josh. The tension spilled into public view. A few months after Susan vanished, Josh ran into her father, Chuck Cox, at a hardware store. When Chuck asked for a hug from his grandsons, Josh shot him down with the cold, quote, "No, you may not," end quote. The encounter escalated, and by 2011, a judge granted Josh a restraining order against Chuck. Eventually, both men were handed anti-harassment orders that kept them 500 feet apart. At home, Josh gave his boys no comfort. He told Charlie and Braden only that he didn't know where their mother was. To anyone who asked, he repeated the same line. He had never hurt Susan. He sounded confident he would never face charges, even as the evidence piled higher against him. By 2011, pressure on the Powell family was mounting. Detectives wanted answers about Susan's disappearance, and that summer, they expanded their focus beyond Josh. In August, investigators arrived in Puyallup, Washington with a search warrant for Stephen Powell's house. What they found inside Stephen's home shocked even seasoned investigators. Instead of evidence pointing directly at Susan's fate, they uncovered something else: Stephen's secret life. Hidden in his home were boxes of tapes, photographs, and journals. Much of it revealed a disturbing fixation on Susan. There were also images of neighborhood children captured without their knowledge in vulnerable moments, while undressing and bathing. The discovery was deeply incriminating. Stephen was arrested and charged with 15 counts of voyeurism and 1 count of possessing child pornography. This was the same man who had publicly claimed that his missing daughter-in-law was in love with him. So what many once dismissed as the fantasy of an eccentric old man was now exposed as something much darker. Among the evidence were images of Susan herself, taken secretly through curtains and doorways during the brief period when she and Josh had lived in his house. They proved what Susan had confided years earlier, that she felt unsafe around Stephen.
Here's my stash of pictures that I feel very fortunate to have. There she is, and I don't know when. This is another high school shot, probably. That's what she must have been wearing a couple of mornings ago when I was taping her, doing her makeup. Every time she takes a shower, I'm anxious to get into her laundry.
It'd be great to go to Colorado and see a different part of the U.S., you know?
Yeah. I'm probably wrong, but I'm really falling in love with you. Maybe I'm interpreting something that I shouldn't be interpreting. It just, for example, when we were sitting on the couch, it just felt like you were very, I was extremely aroused, and I think you were somewhat aroused, at least I thought.
I don't know where you're going with this.
Susan, I'll tell you where
I'm married to your son, and I should just be the daughter-in-law.
I know.
Which puts me a step beneath your own children.
Okay.
And that's where I'm coming from. I was kind of meaning to talk to you about this. My own father doesn't kiss me, and you kiss me, and I didn't like that.
His claims that Susan had pursued him collapsed entirely. The truth was undeniable. It was Stephen who was obsessed, and Susan who recoiled from him. While Stephen was taken to jail, Josh remained the central figure in Susan's disappearance. and when investigators pressed him during the same period, his responses grew more disturbing. Rather than cooperate, Josh tried to deflect with an outrageous claim that Susan's supposed childhood abuse explained why she was so, quote, flirtatious and, quote, infatuated with this father. It was a grotesque attempt to twist the blame onto Susan while aligning himself with Stephen's delusions. Those claims flew in the face of everything Susan's family, friends, and even Josh's own sister had ever said. Yet Josh clung to the story, still insisting Susan had left on her own. According to him, while he and the boys were camping, she had simply risen from bed in the middle of the night, walked downstairs, and vanished. Stephen's arrest left no doubt about the toxic, predatory environment surrounding Josh and the children. And as the legal system caught up with Stephen, the focus began to shift toward the safety of Charlie and Braden, and the fight over who would protect them. While Stephen faced criminal charges, Josh remained the primary suspect in Susan's disappearance. The evidence gathered from both homes only deepened suspicion. After Stephen Powell's arrest, Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, argued that Josh's home was unsafe. Their daughter was still missing, Josh was still a person of interest, and now Stephen sat in jail on voyeurism and child pornography charges. The Coxes pushed harder than ever for custody of their grandsons, Charlie and Braden. Josh resisted at every turn. He refused Chuck and Judy's requests to see the boys, fought their involvement, and painted them as enemies trying to tear his family apart. In September 2011, the fight came to a head in family court. Josh represented himself, standing alone at the table across from Susan's parents. He denied all of the allegations tied to his father and promised the court that he would keep his sons away from Stephen even if Stephen made bail. But prosecutors reminded the judge of the criminal fact. Josh Powell was still the primary person of interest in Susan's disappearance. That weighed heavily in the court's decision. The judge ruled against Josh. Charlie and Braden would remain with their maternal grandparents, Chuck and Judy Cox. The blow didn't end there. In a second ruling that same day, the judge ordered Josh to undergo a full psychosexual evaluation, complete with a polygraph test. The reason traced back to 2009 when investigators first searched the Powell home. Among the items seized were disturbing cartoon-style animations depicting adults and children in sexual acts. They weren't photographs, but the images were troubling enough to raise questions about Josh's mindset and about the environment he was creating for his children. Combined with the mounting suspicion around Susan's disappearance, the discovery convinced the court Josh could not safely parent without strict oversight. He was granted only limited, supervised visits with his sons several times a week, always held at a state-monitored facility. But even under supervision, the pressure on Josh was growing, and the Cox family began to notice a shift. Charlie and Braden were settling into their grandparents' home, and soon they started talking openly about the night of that midnight camping trip. In the safety of their grandparents' home, Charlie and Braden slowly began to open up. They were only little boys, but what they did reveal would rattle the Cox family and investigators alike. At preschool, one of the boys drew a picture of himself, his brother, their father, and the family car. When a teacher gently asked where their mother was, the boy answered matter-of-factly, quote, "Well, mommy's in the trunk," end quote. These innocent words and pictures cut directly against Josh's story. His insistence that Susan stayed home while he took the boys out in the freezing desert that night. Children aren't always considered reliable witnesses, but the details they shared were specific enough to alarm investigators, and they gave the Cox family a fragile but vital sense of hope. Josh's sister Jennifer noticed the same change too. When the boys first arrived in their grandparents' home, they were withdrawn, quiet, even angry. Within 2 months, they were laughing again, playing, hugging, acting like children. In that sense of safety, fragments of the truth began to emerge. Still, the court required visits with Josh to continue. Several times a week, Charlie and Braden were escorted to see their father. The visits took place at a house that Josh was renting, though investigators believed he wasn't really living there. To them, the place looked staged, a facade of normalcy. In reality, Josh was still residing in Stephen's home. The arrangement unsettled Chuck Cox. He worried not just for his grandsons, but also the social worker assigned to transport them. His fears would prove tragically justified on a Sunday visit that began like any other, the first visit after Josh had taken his court-ordered polygraph. Charlie and Braden had been playing happily at their grandparents' house, reluctant to go. But because the visits were court-ordered, Chuck and Judy gently coaxed them into going, reassuring them that they'd be safe with their father. The social worker soon arrived and prepared to take the boys, a routine visit that was about to become anything but ordinary. What no one realized was that while the Cox family was comforting Charlie and Braden, Josh was already in motion, setting the final pieces of his plan into place. On Saturday, February 4th, 2012, Josh Powell began putting his plan in motion. That morning, he dropped his children's toys and clothing into a charity donation box. At 11:32 a.m., he walked into a bank, withdrew $7,000 in cash, and transferred several $1,000s more to his other sister, Alina, one of the very few relatives he was still close to. By early afternoon, he was at a storage unit that he had rented. Detectives later pieced together that he spent nearly an hour and a half inside, going through boxes of Susan's belongings. When he left, he drove to a landfill 10 miles away and discarded a bundle of items taken from the unit. Whatever was in that bundle, it was something he never intended for anyone else to find. That evening, Josh walked into a department store and purchased 2 5-gallon cans along with a pack of Sterno fuel. From there, he stopped at a gas station to fill the cans with gasoline. The supplies were clear. He was preparing for something devastating. The next morning, February 5th, Josh composed a series of short emails to his family. Most were just a few words. Quote, "I'm sorry, goodbye," end quote. Around 10:30 a.m., he called Alina directly, telling her he couldn't live without his sons, that he, quote, "couldn't go on anymore," end quote. Alarmed, Alina immediately called 911. Later, investigators would determine that Josh had doused the rental house in gasoline and set out a hatchet inside, laying the groundwork for what he intended to do next. That same morning, as the clock ticked closer to noon, a state-assigned social worker pulled into the Cox driveway. It was time for Charlie and Braden's supervised visit with their father. The boys were playing happily and didn't want to leave, but Chuck and Judy reassured them they'd be okay, coaxing them toward the car. The social worker buckled them in and drove them toward Graham, Washington, unaware that Josh had already set a trap. Just before noon, the social worker pulled up to Josh's rental home in Graham, Washington. Charlie and Braden climbed out of the car, still bundled against the February cold. As they reached the doorstep, Josh appeared, pulled both boys inside with sudden force, and slammed the door shut, the lock clicking behind them, shutting the social worker out on the porch. As the door closed, she caught the sharp, unmistakable scent of gasoline wafting from inside. At 12:08 p.m., panic filled her voice as she dialed 911. She explained, breathless, that Josh had locked her out and taken the boys, saying, quote, "I'm afraid for their lives," end quote. But the operator kept her on the line, moving through routine questions, and her pleas for urgent help were brushed aside. 7 long minutes ticked by. Still, no officers were dispatched.
But I think I need help right away. He's on a very short lease with DSHS, and CPS has been involved. And this is the craziest thing. He looked right at me and closed the door. Are you there?
Yes, ma'am. I'm just waiting to know where you are.
Okay. It's 8119 189th Street, Port East, Puyallup, 98375. And I'd like to pull out of the driveway because I smell gasoline and he won't let me in.
You want to pull out of the driveway because you smell gasoline, but he won't let you...
He won't let me in.
He won't let you out of the driveway?
He won't let me in the house.
Whose house
He's
is
got the
it?
kids in the house and he won't let me in. It's a supervised visit.
I understand. Whose house is it?
Josh Powell.
Okay, so you don't live there, right?
No, I don't. No, I'm contracted to the state to provide supervised visitation.
I see. Okay. And who is there to exercise their visitation?
I am. And the visit is with Josh Powell.
And who
And
supervises?
he is the husband that I supervise.
So you supervise and you're doing the visit?
Yeah,
You're
I
supervising yourself?
I supervise myself. I'm the supervisor here.
Wait a minute. If it's a supervised visit, you can't supervise yourself. If you're the
I do
visitor...
supervise myself. I'm the supervisor for the supervised visit.
Okay, well, aren't you the one making the visit? Or is there another
I'm the
parent
one.
that you're supervising?
No, I'm the one that supervises. I pick up the kids at their grandparents.
Yes. And then who visits with the children?
Josh Powell.
Okay, so you're supposed to be there to supervise Josh Powell's visit with the children.
Yes, that's correct.
And how did...
And he's the husband of missing Susan Powell. This is a high-profile case.
How did he gain access to the children before you got there?
I was one step in back of them.
Okay, so they went into the house and then he locked you out.
Yes, he shut the door right in my face.
All right, now it's clear. Your last name?
My name is Elizabeth Griffin Hall.
Griffin Hall is hyphenated?
Yes.
And what agency are you with?
Foster Care Resource Network. And the kids have been in there by now approximately 10 minutes. And he knows this is a supervised visit. 2. Braden is 5 and Charlie is 7.
And the dad's last name?
Powell, Powell. L.
2 L's? 2 L's at the end of Powell?
Yes.
His first name?
His first name is Josh.
Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, native?
He's white.
Date of birth?
I don't know. He's about 39.
How tall?
5'10", 150 pounds.
Hair color?
Brown.
Did you notice what he was wearing?
No, I didn't notice what he was wearing.
Is he alone then, or is anybody...
I don't know. I couldn't get in the house.
Are you in a vehicle now or on foot?
I'm in a vehicle. I'm in a Prius, a 2010 Prius.
What color
with
is
the
it?
doors locked. But he hasn't opened the door. I rang the doorbell and everything.
What color
I
is
begged him to let me in.
Elizabeth, please listen to my questions. What color is the Toyota Prius?
Gray, dark gray.
And the license number?
I don't know. I can look.
All right, we'll have somebody look for you there.
Okay, how long will it be?
I don't know, ma'am. They have to respond to emergency, life-threatening situations first. The first available deputy...
Well, this could be life-threatening. He went to court on Wednesday, and he didn't get his kids back. And this is really... I'm afraid for their lives.
Okay, has he threatened the lives of the children previously?
I have no idea.
All right, we'll have the first available deputy contact you.
Thank you.
Bye.
At 12:16 p.m., the call was finally pushed out to deputies, but flagged as routine, not urgent. That same instant, neighbors began flooding 911 with their own reports. An explosion had ripped through the Powell house. Flames and smoke curled into the sky. The social worker called back, her voice breaking, saying, quote, "He exploded the house," end quote. Inside, Josh had carried out the plan he'd spent days preparing for. Investigators later determined that he struck Charlie and Braden with a hatchet, blows meant to weaken them. Then he poured gasoline through the house and lit the fire. Flames roared through the structure within minutes, and by the time firefighters arrived, it was already an inferno. At the Cox home, Chuck didn't hear it from police. Instead, a friend who had seen the breaking news on Facebook called him first. The words were unbearable. Josh had killed himself and the boys in a fiery explosion. When the fire was finally smothered, investigators confirmed what everyone had already feared. Josh Powell had murdered his sons before killing himself. Both boys bore hatchet wounds, but in the end, it was smoke inhalation that claimed their lives. This was not a sudden snap, it was a deliberate, rehearsed plan. In one final act of rage and control, Josh ensured that the Cox family lost not only Susan, but Charlie and Braden as well. News of the Powell house explosion spread fast. By the time authorities confirmed what had happened, the story was everywhere and the country was horrified. The details were almost too much to comprehend. A father striking his sons with a hatchet before setting his home ablaze. When recordings of the social worker's desperate 911 calls were released, outrage only grew. Listeners heard her pleading for urgent help, repeating again and again that the boys' lives were in danger, only to be met with delay and procedure. The lack of urgency became a national flashpoint. For Chuck and Judy Cox, it was devastation layered on devastation. First, their daughter had vanished. Now, their grandsons were gone too. killed during a visit that was supposed to be supervised and safe. Chuck later described it as, quote, losing everything all over again, end quote. The community mourned. Vigils drew hundreds, with neighbors, classmates, and strangers leaving flowers, candles, and stuffed animals in the boy's memory. Charlie and Braden became symbols of innocence lost to a system that had failed to protect them. But even in their grief, the Cox family vowed not to give up on Susan. Investigators pressed on, combing through Josh's storage unit again in the months that followed. They recovered a comforter that tested positive for bloodstains and preliminary tests. Chuck Cox also believed there was still one person who could answer the questions that haunted him: Stephen Powell. Detectives interrogated Stephen relentlessly, but he stayed silent. He wasn't free for long, though. In 2012, he was convicted on voyeurism charges. 3 years later, found guilty of child pornography. He was paroled in 2017 and died of a heart attack in 2018. Attention also turned to Josh's brother, Michael. He had helped Josh move from West Valley City back to Puyallup. The car he used in that move was sold off for salvage immediately afterward, raising suspicions it may have been used to dispose of evidence. When asked if he would ever come forward if he knew about what happened to Susan, Michael replied, chillingly, absolutely not. Exactly 1 year after Josh killed himself and his sons, Michael leapt to his death from a 7-story parking garage. The Cox family didn't stop fighting. They filed a civil suit against Washington's Department of Social and Health Services, arguing negligence for failing to protect Charlie and Braden during their supervised visits. A jury agreed, awarding the boys' estates $98.5 million in damages. Meanwhile, police in Utah eventually suspended active searches for Susan. Her disappearance remains an open case, unresolved, but never forgotten. For Chuck and Judy, the fight continues. They carry forward the memory of Susan, Charlie, and Braden, determined that their loss will never be in vain. The story of Susan Powell is one that carries unbearable weight. A young mother who tried to protect herself, who left behind warnings no one should ever have to write. Her disappearance remains an open case, though it is currently inactive. Still, her voice is here in the journals, the videos, and the notes she left behind. And then there are Charlie and Braden, who never had the chance to grow up. Their loss wasn't just a tragedy for a family, it was a failure that exposed cracks in the very systems meant to protect children. Their names deserve to be spoken with the same care as their mothers, as lives cut short, but never forgotten. That's all for today's episode. Susan's case and the devastating loss of Charlie and Braden is a reminder of how control and abuse can turn deadly, and how fragile the systems meant to protect families can actually be. If you want to explore this case in full details, visit our website, darklyspeakingpodcast.com, for all of the source materials and show notes. You can also follow along on socials at Darkly Speaking Podcast to stay connected. And if you or someone you know is living with domestic violence, you are not alone. Please reach out for help. In the U.S., you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or text START to 88788. These resources will also be linked on our website. Thank you so much for listening and for carrying the memory of Susan, Charlie, and Braden with you. I'll see you next time with a brand new episode.